Hello guys, welcome back to my channel and enjoy this fanfic part 2. Now let's start the fanfic. Naruto felt like such an idiot for being so possessive over Hinata. His walk home after dropping off Hinata at the Hyuga compound had made him feel like crap. Even he couldn't figure out why he felt so jealous at the thought of that guy always hanging around Hinata. He knew very well that Hinata loved him, a lot too. So why was he so possessive this night? He wasn't stupid. He knew that men look at her, even when he was standing right there beside her. But he didn't mind that because he knew Hinata loved him. Whenever men leered at her when he was with her, he would quickly grab her hand and pull her to him and make sure that all those men knew that she was his and he will never let go. Sure, he got mad sometimes when they wouldn't look away, but that was easily fixed when he narrowed his eyes at them and his blue eyes would turn red and those men would turn around quickly. But whenever he went to drop off Hinata at her place, that guard would piss him off. Maybe it was the fact that that Katsu guy kept on narrowing his eyes at him, or the fact that his eyes would so obviously twinkle whenever he looked at her, or even the fact that he got to be so closer to Hinata even at night than Naruto was to her. It's not like he thought Hinata would be unfaithful to him. Heck no, he will be able to see pigs fly before that ever happened. But he can't really explain it. It just frustrated him. That night he lay awake on his small bed for hours, contemplating what he should do. Suddenly, he felt like he needed to tell her how he felt about her. He has been with her for 2 months now and he had known for most of it that he loved her. Yet he had not told her so as of yet. He just didn't know how to say something like that to someone. He had seen in many movies how to do it. But he seriously doubted, knowing him, that he would ever make it as romantic and perfect. But she needed to know and he desperately wanted her to know it as well. But he was sure to get restless and nervous before he even said it to her. So his best guess was to do it at a place where he felt peace. A place that calmed him, and he knew just the place. That night Naruto had a few hours of peaceful sleep and was more than ready to do what he had wanted for a while now when he woke up the next morning. The next morning when he made his way to the Hyuga compound, he felt good. He felt great really, and when he saw Hinata walk out the door as she made her way towards her, he felt even better. Seeing Hinata first thing in the morning was his favorite part of the day, right after spending the day with her. But it soon vanished when Katsu too turned his head to her and that stupid twinkle returned to his eyes and his glaring face turned to a soft smiling one. Naruto felt the odd feeling of possessiveness from yesterday build up inside him and he wanted to control it because they were still at her house and he did not want to do anything that would embarrass her, no matter how cute she looked when she was all red-faced and fumbling around. So instead he glared at Katsu and reached his hand to pull her away from him. "Let's go, Hinata," he said, and he pulled her towards him and hurriedly made his way to his destination. He didn't, however, fail to notice Hinata's unusual quietness or the way she seems to avoid eye contact with him. But that wasn't too uncharacteristic for her to be like that, so he disregarded it. But he soon found himself needing a little fueling, so he made his way to Ichiraku's with a quiet Hinata beside him. Their breakfast was more than awkward today. Yes, Hinata was a quiet person, but over the last 2 months she has really come out of her shell and he couldn't be happier about it. He loved getting to know a side of Hinata that nobody had the privilege to know. Not to mention he felt a little smug about knowing that part too when no one else did. Like that part of her that would laugh really loudly whenever he tickled her because, get this, she was ticklish everywhere. Or the part of her that would very rarely initiate physical contact from him, such as reaching for his hand. He definitely loved the part of her that moaned his name when he deepened their kiss, or the way she would angle her head when he pushed his tongue inside her mouth. But right now, she was being rather quiet and he himself felt like he wanted to be quiet right now to gather his thoughts. He's never told a girl he loved her knowing that the relationship has a future. Sure, he had said it to Sakura 100 times, but with her it had always been the same thing. He always knew she loved Sasuke, so he had known that even if he said it to her, she would never say it back. But now, Now he's not the first one to say it, and he knows that this relationship he had with Hinata will last, he just knows it. So the two remained in silence as they had their breakfast. When Naruto finally felt like his eternal hunger had somewhat subsided, he turned to Hinata to find her staring at the countertop, though it was clear that something was definitely bothering her. That's when he remembered his less than subtle attempt to let Katsu know that she was his. He turned to her abruptly, startling her in the process. "I'm sorry I was in such a bad mood yesterday, Hinata," he said to her, and for a moment she looked like she was shocked at his words before she composed herself and quickly replied with a, "It's alright, Naruto-kun." He suddenly stood up from his chair and took hold of her small hand in his. "Let's go," he declared as a wide smile spread across his face as he thought about where he planned to take her. "Where are we going, Naruto-kun?" she asked with a squeak as he pulled her along. He didn't answer her because it would be a surprise and he fully intended to see her reaction to it. He started climbing the hill that he'd climbed 1,000 times before with Hinata's hand tightly and securely in his. Somehow to Naruto, climbable the hill felt like a whole new experience today. A feeling he has never gotten before taking the same route to the top. When he suddenly stopped walking and faced her, she looked a little out of breath with a slight blush on her pale cheeks. She looked at him questioningly, and all he did as an answer was grab her shoulders and turn her towards the view. Naruto watched as her beautiful lavender eyes widened to an impossible extent and she took in the beautiful scene before her. While she did that, she remained totally oblivious to the man beside her as he stared at her. Hinata's mouth was slightly parted and her eyes were wide with shock, and he did not think he has ever seen anything more beautiful than she is at this moment in his life. "It's beautiful, Naruto-kun," she whispered, and he saw, more than heard, the words slip out of her pink lips. "Isn't it? I spent long hours here as a child," he said as he sat down on the ground and patted the ground beside him, motioning for her to sit down beside him. She sat down beside him, though she did not take her eyes away from the sight she is still enjoying. "Alone?" she asked, and he heard the sadness in her voice as she came to the realization. "When people used to call me names and things, I would just come up here and spend hours here," he said as his painful childhood replayed in his head. He wanted Hinata to know everything about him. Things that made him happy, sad, shocked, pained. He wanted her to know everything. As if she had read his mind, Naruto felt Hinata move and push herself flush against his side as she leaned on his body. But when he turned around to look at her, her blush from before had doubled in color and she kept on staring at the scene before her. He smiled at her even though she was not looking at him. The fact that he spent hours on end here as a child crying, and the fact that he was here right now with her as she tried her best to let him know that she will always be here with him from now on and that he does not need to be alone anymore, made his heart give a pleasant squeeze. He felt so stupid to have acted too selfishly possessive over her yesterday when she so clearly loved him to no end. When she had not so much as looked at another man with the same sparkling eyes as the way she looks at him. "Hinata," he called her softly. Her body moved slightly as she shivered a little. He rarely felt the cold sometimes because of the Kyuubi, and he wondered if it's really that cold out today. He didn't give it much thought as he quickly shrugged out of his jacket and wrapped it around her shoulders. You'll be cold," she said, and he gave her another one his assuring smiles. "I'm fine. Kurama's chakra usually keep me pretty warm," he said as he sheepishly scratched the back of his head. The next moment his hand was back down at his side and his smile faded from his face. "Hinata." He called her name again. She hummed as a reply. He took a deep breath before speaking again. He wanted this moment to be perfect because he had given her so many perfect moments in the last 2 months. He just doesn't seem to realize that whatever the moment he decides to tell her he loves her would be seen as a perfect moment in her eyes. "I love you," he finally said, and she froze in his arms and he felt all movement stop, even her breathing. She turned her head towards him a moment later, her eyes as wide as saucers. He's giving her all kinds of surprises today. You've never said that before," she stuttered out, and he felt his face heat up as she stared at him. Yeah, but I knew it a long time ago. I just didn't know how to say it, he said as his whole face and ears heated up. They stared at each other like that for a long time, but neither wanted to look away. She had been so shocked to hear him say that, and it was evident in her eyes as well. But he could also see the happiness she felt just by hearing him say those few words. He was happy as well because he had taken part in making her feel that overwhelming emotion. Do you love me too? He had to ask. He knew of course that she did, but he had the sudden urge to hear her say it to him. Of course I do, she said, looking at him with bewilderment as if the question was absurd. That's when he realized the question was absurd, because she had been showing him how much she loved him from the very beginning. Even before he had known he loved her. He grinned at her before wrapping his arm around her shoulder. Naruto felt great to have said that to her because he had been wanting to for the longest time. He felt really dumb to have been so jealous before, because her love for him is evident in the way she looks at him. And if he had known that his unnecessary possessiveness over her would have him end up in the hospital for 2 days, then he definitely would have never kissed her in front on her father. But it had felt nice when he saw Katsu's eyes widen in shock when he pulled her to him. It was worth it. But he would still not do it in front of her father again. Definitely not. Naruto had a really small bed. So small in fact that he had hated it with his very being since he turned 15, that is until now. Right now, he was more than happy that his bed is small. He was praising his state of bankruptcy for never allowing him to have enough money to buy a bigger bed. Because at this very moment, he was lying on his small bed with his girlfriend flush against his side. Neither could move because they both fit on it barely. It was a single bed, so even though they both could lay on it, they had to be very, very, very close. Not that Naruto minded. When Hinata had arrived at his front door at 2 o'clock, the weather outside had already been bad. There was a light drizzle and the heavy rain clouds were moving fast towards the village. She had only come to give him some homemade lunch and planned on leaving right after. But right at that moment, the light drizzle had turned into a full-blown storm with thunder and lightning and the whole deal. So he had invited her in to wait out the storm. Couple hours into the storm and sitting at his kotatsu table playing Go Fish had grown boring quite fast. That's how the two ended up on his bed with Hinata on the side closer to the wall lying on her back with her head resting on his arm, while Naruto too lay on his back with his left arm under Hinata's head and the other over his stomach and intertwined with her left hand between them. He could see the darkened sky overhead from his window and wished it would never stop raining. Naruto could feel her body heat radiating off of her skin and to his even through her jacket and his. At first it had been awkward for the two of them. He had been the one to suggest that they go on to the bed because sitting on the floor was hurting his butt, and she had reluctantly agreed with a massive blush. In the first 10 minutes they had tried to get comfortable on the small bed. When they finally found their position to be comfortable for the both of them, it had been quite easy find it normal to be so close to each other. Though his arm is numb and they could both barely fit on the bed, he had never felt more at peace than he felt right now. To be able to be this close to another person and wish for the sensation to last longer was a concept that Naruto had a hard time grasping. But right now he wasn't thinking about the why_s and how_s, because just having a person to be this close was enough for him. For 19 years he lived in his house alone, ate alone, slept alone, and since he started dating Hinata 6 months ago she had been vising him a lot. Whenever he opened his front door to be greeted by her gentle smile, he couldn't stop the beat that his heart skips. Right now though, as they lay side by side, their bodies so close to each other's and their hand intertwined, Naruto couldn't think of a better way to spend his day. He turned his head from the ceiling of his apartment to her and just simply stared at her as she stared out the window as the rain came down on the roof and dripped off the side. He was conscious of the way her thumb kept on brushing over his hand softly, so lovingly. He stared at her like that for a long time. Stares at the way her long black-blue eyelashes would slowly brush against the underside of her eyes every time she blinked, at the way her hair was falling onto her left side as she stared outside with a slightly tilted head. At the way she continued to stare outside as if the very concept of rain fascinated her. It must have really fascinated her too, because it took her a long time to realize that he had been staring at her. When she turned her head to him and saw him staring at her, she angled her head to look at him and get a better view. She noticed the small happy smile on his lips, and she couldn't help the smile that came into her own lips. When Naruto saw her smile and read in her smile that she too did not want the rain to stop, he lifted his head off of the pillow and moved his hand so that he was propped up on his elbow. Hinata's head hit the pillow and she looked at him confusedly. He broke their intertwined hands and her hand laid on her stomach in his move to move her bangs from her forehead. She blushed immediately when his hand ran over her forehead as he moved her silky hair away, and the same hand came down to her cheek to cup it. She looked so absolutely gorgeous with her blushing cheeks and her hair resting on one side and her perfect pink lips parted in a silent gasp. She looked sinfully beautiful, and the thought that this angel was in his bed, in his arms, is what made him lower his head to hers and run his lips over hers in a soft kiss. He felt her hand move between them and land on the back of his head as she pulled him closer. He lowered his body and both his hands moved to either side of her head on the bed, holding him up, and he deepened the kiss. He was practically on top of her and he was aware of every curve of her body as she moved her other hand to his back and pulled him even closer to her. He had the sudden urge to bite her lip, and the instant her lips were between his teeth, he bit down rather harshly and he heard her gasp, and he took her moment of shock to push his tongue inside her mouth. She tasted so heavenly every time he kissed her. It was different every time, and every time he loved it more and more. The kiss that had started off being a soft, chaste kiss had now turned into one of passion and desire. His tongue was exploring every part of her hot and delicious mouth, and her hands were pulling him closer and closer to her body, and the two lovers could barely hear the rain outside their window. Instead, their ears were filled with the heavy breathing of the other as they tried their best to go the longest without breathing, and the moans and groans of the other every time their lips met. The barely held-in moan of Naruto-kun that escaped her made Naruto lose all coherent thought. He moved his right hand from where it lay on the bed, giving all his body weight to his left hand, and pushed it from under her jacket and slowly moved it to her. She gasped into his mouth as soon as his hand made contact with her soft and smooth skin. She moved her head away from his mouth and looked to the side, but his mouth moved from her lips down to her jaw to her neck, all the while he cupped his hand on her over her mesh shirt. She only had a bra on and no binding because she did not have a mission, and he was so grateful for it too as he felt her softness on his fingers. Naruto-kun, she moaned as he trailed kisses down up and down her neck. God, he loved it when she called him that. It only drove him to squeeze her harder and lick the mark he left on her neck more fiercely. Naruto, she said as she put her hands on his chest and pushed him away from her. He lifted his head and stared at her questioningly, but she didn't say anything, which he took as the cue to continue. He dipped his head again to her neck, but she pushed him away from her. Naruto-kun, please, no, she said quietly, and he lifted his head to look at her as he heard her pleading voice. His blue eyes went to her lavender ones and saw that they were not filled with the love she seems to have in them whenever she looked at him. Instead, her eyes were filled with unshed tears as she stared up at him, her cheeks blazing red and her breath coming out as heavy pants. Naruto's heart started beating loudly in his chest, and he quickly removed his hand from under her shirt and sat down on the bed, facing her. He was now aware of the pelting rain outside his window as he stared down at her broken expression. He didn't know what to say. He hadn't meant for it to get that far. He had no idea what came over him. He had never planned on doing this like that. But then again, you can't exactly plan things like that either. But to think that lust and desire had the ability to impair all coherent thought from a person was exciting as well as terrifying. The tears finally escaped her eyes and rolled down the side of her face, and she sat up abruptly and stood up from the bed. Hinata. he called, reaching for her hand as she ran towards the door but barely missed. Hinata. He called again, his voice reaching desperation, but she did not stop. She ran out the door, leaving behind her shoes as well as a hurt Naruto. He knew he should have run after her, except he didn't because he had no idea what he was supposed to say to her. He stared at the door of his apartment for a long time before lying down on the bed again facing the ceiling. He immediately missed her warmth and buried his face on the pillow that still had her coconut shampoo scent on it. Oddly enough, suddenly he found his bed to be way too big. Naruto didn't know how long he stayed like that on his bed with his face buried on his pillow. But when he heard the knock on his door and bolted upright hoping that it was Hinata, the rain had fully stopped and the sky was a beautiful blue with the sun peeking through from the rooftops overhead. He yanked his door open only to be disappointed because on the other side of his door was not Hinata but an Anbu. Oh! The disappointment he felt, he knew, was not concealed well. Good morning to you too, Dobi. He heard Sasuke's muffled voice through the mask. Morning, he asked, finally understanding that he had slept through the night. Yeah, the Hokage wants to see you right away, Sasuke said before disappearing as soon as he had appeared. Naruto closed the door behind him and sluggishly got ready to go see Ba-chan. He couldn't stop thinking about yesterday. It had been so exciting. He had never experienced something like that ever in his life. It was similar to the adrenaline rush he gets before a battle, yet it had been so different as well. He felt the adrenaline and the rush, but the fear and the need to finish it as soon as possible were nowhere to be seen. He just wanted to keep touching her, keep feeling her, keep tasting her. The fact that she felt uncomfortable with his explorations had not even occurred to him. He wasn't usually like that. He always makes sure that everyone else is comfortable. Especially Hinata of all people. Then why had he not thought about how she would feel? Why had that not occurred to him as he ran his hand over her body? When he arrived at the Hokage's office, he was called in immediately and he stood in front of Ba-chan waiting to hear what she had to say. He did not miss the strange way Tsunade looked at him or the odd look he received from Shizune outside. But he decided to be ignorant to all of that and instead listen to Tsunade. She seems to hesitate before beginning to speak. Naruto, everyone has come to a decision to name you the next Hokage, she said carefully, and Naruto's blue eyes widened and he could have sworn his heart stopped beating for like a second before restarting again. But since you are too young, you will be in training with me for a couple of years until you are ready. You have more than proven yourself to the village and the whole world that you are capable of the task, she finished with a smirk on her lips, and Naruto didn't know how to react. He had wanted this for so long and right now it felt like he was dreaming. Congratulations Naruto Uzumaki, Tsunade said with a warm smile, and Naruto couldn't even say anything to that, so instead he nodded his head and left the tower. As soon as he stepped out of the Hokage tower he wanted to see Hinata. He wanted her to be the first to hear the news. But he had no idea how to face her after what he had done. He truly felt ashamed of himself for giving into his lust, but he had just received the greatest news of his life and he needed her to be the first to hear it. Which is why he silently made his way to his apartment, even though all he wanted to do was climb up to the Hokage monument and scream the news to the entire village. He contemplated what he should say to Hinata for a long time. This kind of thing had never happened to him. So he had no idea how to fix it and he needed to fix it. He had to. So when the skies darkened and night fell around the village of Konoha, he made his way to the Hyuga compound. When he got close to the gates, he decided to avoid it altogether. He didn't like the guard anyway. So he made his way to the back of the compound and sneaked with all the stealth he had in him. If he were to get caught sneaking into Hinata's bedroom in the middle of the night, he would lose his head for sure. He made his way around the compound as quietly as he could, but he stopped dead on his tracks when he found exactly the person he was looking for. Hinata was on the second floor of the compound looking out her open window deep in thought from what he can see. He looked at her as she looked out her window. Her midnight hair was swaying to the slight breeze of the night and her eyes seemed to sparkle brighter than the stars of the night. Naruto watched as Hinata tucked a stray piece of hair behind her ear and he realized how truly beautiful she really is. He concentrated chakra to his feet and jumped to her window sill, successfully scaring her and earning a squeal as she backed away from the window with a kunai in hand. Well, now at least he knew she was prepared if an intruder came in. Naruto-kun, she asked bewildered as she dropped the kunai on her bed and all he could do was grin and scratch the back of his head sheepishly. Hey Hinata. He said facing her. She wasn't in her usual ninja attire. She was wearing a light purple gown, what he assumed is her nightgown. It ran all the way down to her ankles and it was tied with a ribbon just above her chest. It was weird seeing her in a dress, but he wouldn't deny that she looked stunning in one. Naruto-kun, what are you doing here? She asked as she looked at her bedroom door before facing him again. I wanted to tell you something. He began quietly. She looked at him waiting for him to continue. Hinata, I was chosen to be the next Hokage. He finished looking at her. She seemed too shocked to do anything for a while before her eyes widened and her eyes filled with tears. Naruto panicked for a second, unable to figure out why she was crying. But the next thing he knew, she jumped into his arms, wrapping her arms around his back and pulling him against her. Naruto-kun, congratulations. I'm so happy for you, she said into his shirt and her quiet voice was muffled by his shirt. He heard her sob and felt her shoulders shake as she cried, and that's when he realized that she was crying for him. Hinata, are you crying for me? He asked as his own arms went to circle around her. I'm so happy, Naruto-kun. Your dream is finally coming true, she said through sobs and his hands tightened around her. Yeah, it is, Naruto whispered as the full extent of the news he had received this morning hit him. This was his dream, he had worked so hard to get here. He had wanted this for as long as he can remember and he had someone to celebrate his biggest achievement with too. 5 years ago, if somebody had told him that he would have someone by his side when his dream finally came true, he would have laughed at them. Naruto never would have thought that he would ever have someone in his life to cry for him like Hinata is doing right now. To have someone be so happy for him that they would cry tears of joy for him. Naruto felt an incredible warmth seep through his whole being as he held Hinata in his arms as she cried. Teats when his resolve to apologize for his insensitivity increased by tenfold. She was too wonderful, she was too great, and she loved him so much and he loved her so much as well, so he would keep her, he would protect her and he would love her to no end because he felt that they belonged with each other. They were meant for each other. Hinata. He said her name softly and held her shoulders and pushed her away from him to look at her face. Her eyes were red from crying and her nose was also red, but she looked up at him in question. Hinata, I'm sorry about yesterday. I got carried away and I didn't think about how it would make you feel. I'm really sorry. He finished as his eyes bore down into hers, conveying his apology to her. She stared at him for a moment before breaking into a beautiful gentle smile. Naruto-kun, that's not it at all, she said as she reached her hand and laid it on his cheek and the warmth from her hand seeped into his face and he wanted to take her hand and press it more firmly against his skin just to feel her. The reason I told you to stop is because, she paused looking away from him as a familiar blush creeped into her pale cheeks. I'm not very shapely like Sakura-chan or beautiful as Ino-chan. I was just embarrassed. She finished in a quiet voice, totally avoiding eye contact with him and her face turning an impossible color of red. Naruto stared at the top of her head for a long time in disbelief. It didn't take him long to burst into laughter. He knew he shouldn't laugh, but he couldn't help it. He tried his best to control his voice as his laughter died down. When he looked down at her, she was pouting and she looked so adorable that he ended up laughing again. When he calmed down to a certain extent, he looked down at her. That's ridiculous, Hinata. You are the most beautiful girl I've ever seen, he said in between his laughter. It was indeed ridiculous. He spent most of his days thinking about how beautiful his girlfriend is and his girlfriend doesn't think she's beautiful. Naruto watched as her eyes moved to his face, looking at him with uncertainty. Naruto stopped laughing and looked at her seriously. He cupped her cheeks in his hands and lifted her head a little to look at him. Hinata, you are breathtakingly beautiful. I don't know what would make you think otherwise, he said in all honesty, and her eyes danced with happiness as he said it. He leaned forward and landed his lips on her forehead and lingered there for a little longer before moving his head back. Naruto-kun, thank you, she whispered with a smile. Hinata, I think we should wait. I know yesterday got a little exciting, but I think we should wait, he told her softly, and she nodded her head in approval at his suggestion. It had taken him a long time to come up with that decision, and he knew it was the best one. As much he wanted to give into his hormones and rip her clothes apart, he wanted to wait. Wait until they were both ready, until they were both older and wiser and married. He knew he would one day marry Hinata, there was no doubt about it. But until then he would wait, because then even if she had doubts, she would not have them after they were married, and he didn't want her to have doubts. A knock on her door disrupted the couple, and they both stared at each other until the second knock came, and that's when they panicked. Hinata-sama, are you alright in there? I heard a man's voice. They heard a female voice from the other side of the door. Oh, yes, I am alright, Aki-san. I didn't hear anything, she said as she bit her lip, hoping her maid would leave soon. Oh, must have been my imagination then. Good night, Hinata-sama. And they heard her footsteps walking away from the room. They both let out a sigh and looked at each other before smiling in amusement. I should leave before someone else shows up. All these guards at your house makes eloping not even worth considering, he said jokingly as he made his way to her window. She blushed as she let out a laugh at his comment. If we decide to elope, I promise I will find a way to make it through all the guards and all the obstacle I have to face to come to you, Naruto-kun, she said gently, and he looked at her in surprise. But really he didn't have to be surprised because he knew she would. I know, he said to her before leaning forward to peck her lips softly. They said their goodbyes, and Naruto quietly made his way out of the compound and walked towards his apartment with the widest grin imaginable on his lips. He would never elope with her. She will be the Hokage's wife, even if he had to beg her father for her hand in marriage. He would make sure of it. Naruto and Hinata didn't get much time to spend together since both were highly skilled Junin-level ninja who often went on missions. But they never forgot to make time in their hectic schedules to meet up with each other and have at least one bowl of ramen or have a walk side by side, however brief it may be. Today was one of those rare days that the two of them had the day off, together. It didn't happen often, but when it did happen, they spent a lot of time together to make up for the lost time. It has been 2 years since the two started dating, but it was the first time he was in the village to celebrate his birthday with his girlfriend. Last year he had to go on a mission that lasted quite a while and missed his birthday completely. But this year, he had refused the mission that had come to him and instead decided to spend it with Hinata. Usually his birthdays were spent alone. In his younger years, he spent his birthday alone because people had despised him. As he got older and the village and the people in it started to accept him, he missed his birthdays because he was too busy being a ninja to have a proper birthday. He has had a couple of birthday get-together that his friends threw for him when all of them were together, but that hasn't happened in a while since everyone reached a high rank and went on long mission often. Maybe the fact that he hasn't had a proper birthday in his entire life is the reason why he couldn't help but feel a little depressed when his birthday neared. From a young age all he wanted was to spend his birthday at home while his mother baked a cake for him and his father ran around town looking for the perfect gift for the perfect son. But that dream had never come true, but to the little orphan child in him that dream had never died, though the grown-up Naruto knows the impossibility of that dream. What is it, Naruto-kun? You look upset. He heard from beside him and his attention immediately went to his girlfriend. They had decided to have a walk after lunch at Ichiraku's. After walking for about 15 minutes, The two had sat down on a bench at a nearby park. It was during that Naruto's mind wandered to impossible dreams of a 7-year-old who still lived inside him sometimes. It's nothing, Hinata, he assured her with a grin, turning to face her. I just get a little depressed near my birthday. Noting too serious, he finished with the grin still in place. Why are you upset near your birthday? You should be happy because you get presents, she said with a smile. I never really got any presents now that I think about it. I spend it alone a lot, he said, looking across him at the playground where kids of all ages played on the slide, the swings, the merry-go-round, on the seesaw. He remembers sitting alone in every single one of those, wishing there was someone else with him to play with. Naruto-kun, he heard Hinata whisper, and he turned his head towards her to see her lavender eyes looking at him with so much sadness and unshed tears. He quickly plastered on his usual grin in his face while he scratched the back of his neck. Don't be sad, Hinata. I got used to it, so it's okay. He tried in an attempt to cheer her up. He couldn't stand seeing her eyes look like that. You shouldn't have had to get used to it, she said quietly, looking away from his eyes, instead looking at the space on the bench between them. Then she suddenly raised her head and looked at him with bright eyes, though there was still a hint of sadness in them. Naruto-kun, let's spend the whole day together tomorrow, she said, looking at him expectantly, her lavender eyes glowing with hope. Quote. And you could think the whole day about what you want as a birthday present, and you can ask me for anything you want. I'll try my very best to get it for you, she said, scooching a little to come closer to him on the bench. She looked so determined that he was speechless for a moment, staring at her with wide blue eyes. He liked the idea of spending his whole birthday with her, that's why he had refused his mission after all. So he smiled at her before nodding his head to her offer. That sounds like fun, he told her, and her eyes lost all its sadness to be replaced with a beautiful, happy and hopeful smile from her. Later, when he went home that day after dropping Hinata off at her house, Naruto thought about what he wanted as a birthday present because she threatened him to think about it seriously and no one believed him, but Hinata can get scary when she wants to, and frankly he was scared. She had her sweet and cute side, and usually that was the side that everyone got to see mostly, but she had her moments. To be completely frank though, he found that side of her to be sexy. Anything I wanted, huh? He wondered out loud, staring up at his ceiling as he lay on his bed with one hand behind his head and the other over his stomach. Now that he thinks about it, he has everything. He is to be the official Hokage in a few months. He has a wonderful girlfriend who loves him more than life itself and whom he loves more than he ever thought possible. He has friends and comrades who will not think twice about risking their lives to save his, not that he would ever let them, and he is acknowledged and praised by the very village and people who despised him as a kid, and not to mention a job that pays him a shitload of money. Yet even with all this he could feel it. He could feel that there was something missing. He could feel it every night when he goes to sleep alone. He could feel it every morning when he wakes up alone on his bed. He could feel it as he had breakfast alone at a table meant for 4 people, and he could feel it when he comes home from a long mission and says, "I'm back," and he only receives silence as an answer, and he could feel it when it's his birthday and no one's there to greet him happy birthday. It took him almost all night to figure out what that something was, and after he figured it out, sleep was the last thing on his mind. Though he must have fallen asleep at some time during the night because he was completely out of it when he heard his name being called out. He knew it was Hinata, but he had no idea whether he was still dreaming because he was having a rather steamy dream where she kept of screaming his name, or if she was actually somewhere close to him. He received his answer when he felt a gentle shake on his shoulder and slowly opened his blue eyes to be greeted with her smile. "Happy birthday, Naruto-kun," she said with a smile. Was the only thing that left his mouth in his tired state. He was still half asleep and was only half sure that Hinata was in his apartment crouching on the ground in front of him. "Wake up, sleepy head. It's 11 o'clock. She said as she stood up and went to stand at the kitchen counter with her back to him. He stared at her back with half-lidded eyes as she did whatever it was that she had been doing. Her long midnight hair that ran down her back was in a bun. She has abandoned her normal ninja attire and was instead wearing a knee-length black pleated skirt and a cream-colored top with sleeves that ran off the shoulders slightly. An outfit, he remembers, he bought her recently. He was on a mission when he saw the skirt and top and couldn't help think that Hinata would look super cute in it. He had bought it on impulse and later feared that the size may not be right. But it fit her perfectly and he was right, she does look cute in it. Hinata. He groaned her name lazily. Wash up Naruto-kun. I invited a couple of friends over. I hope you don't mind. Not too many. Just Sakura-chan, Sasuke-kun, Ino-chan, Shikamaru-kun, Choji-kun and Tenten-chan. Everyone else was on missions. She said without turning to face him but still doing something at the counter. Hinata. He groaned again in a low voice, a little irritated. He's waiting for something and he had already decided unless he receives it he will not be getting out of bed. She turned to him with a perfectly trimmed raised eyebrow. You better wash up and brush your hair before Sasuke-kun gets here and sees it. He'll never stop making fun of it, she said with a sly smile, leaning her back on the counter. It is true. Because he has a tendency to move around a lot in his sleep, his hair gets a little unorganized during the night. Every morning when he woke up his hair would look different. Sometimes it looked really good and he would just leave the house like that, but sometimes it got really creative. He pouted at her, still unmoving from his position on the bed, sleeping on his stomach with one head somehow ending up off of the bed and simply hanging off the side. She let out a sigh, although her lips were already in an amused smile. She then walked over to his bed and crouched down in front of him. She shook her head with a smile and leaned closer to him and pecked his temple before running her hands in his blonde hair to keep it out of his face. Happy. Now can you go wash up? She asked as her slender fingers ran over his hair, making him want to fall back asleep. Can I get a kiss right here if I do it? He asked sleepily, with a grin and pointing at his lips. I'll give you two, she said with a small blush, standing up from her crouched position and walking over to the counter again. With the promise of two of Hinata's soft kisses, Naruto walked to his bathroom. Hinata shook her head and smiled in amusement at Naruto's childishness. He was 21 years old and still as cute as ever. No one would think that Naruto was like this. Of course people knew he was cheerful, happy and childish at times. But this adorable side, the side of him that wouldn't get out of bed without a birthday kiss from her, is a side that is completely hers. A side that, he says, she had brought out from him. She returned to decorating the cake she had baked last night with a smile on her face at her boyfriend's actions. 4 hours later, everyone had gone home after lunch. The couple had then gone for a walk and spend the day doing whatever came to Naruto's mind because she had promised that they would spend the day doing whatever he wanted. Everything from going on the swings at the park to visiting his parents' graves was done by the time the couple came back to Naruto's apartment. She had also dragged him grocery shopping amidst all of it to get him something other than ramen. It was when she was putting away all his groceries with him that she remembered his birthday present from her. She turned to her side to look at her boyfriend, who was neatly putting away packaged ramen in a cupboard because he refused to leave the store without them, and she immediately blushed, forgetting her question in the process. She turned back to her own grocery bag and stuffed things in cupboards quickly. It was a really hot day outside despite it being fall. So Naruto had taken off his usual orange jacket and stood in his kitchen shirtless in only a pair of gray sweatpants hanging low on his waist. He did this often and really she had gotten quite used to it over the 2 years that they have been together. But she still found it rather difficult sometimes when he suddenly does it. Naruto-kun, what would you like as a present from me? Anything you want, as long as it's within my capability I would get it for you, she said as she continued to unload the bag of groceries. She only stopped what she was doing when she felt his hands wrap around her waist. She wondered what it could be that he want, and she already resolved to not give it to him if he says a kiss. She wanted to give him something truly special. Something he could keep forever, and she wanted it to be something he really wanted. A kiss is not on the list. She waited patiently in his arms for him to tell her what he wanted. In the meantime, she enjoyed the proximity and relaxed in his hug. I want to get married, he said after a while, surprising Hinata so much that she tensed in his arms and went immobile. Hinata was shocked, so shocked, beyond this world shocked, unbelievably shocked, that she had no idea how to continue with the conversation even as he stayed quiet for what felt like a very, very long time. Will you marry me? She finally asked, sending Hinata into a world of emotions. She let out a breath as her lower lip trembled, and she suddenly brought her hands up to her face and covered her face with them before sobbing into her sweaty palms. She's older, she's stringer, and she's not as shy as she used to be. But when Naruto asked this question, the question, from her, she was so overwhelmed with emotions. Why are you crying, Hinata? He asked her gently. He didn't sound panicked or scared. He just sounded curious. Maybe he already knew what her answer is going to be, maybe he knew why she was crying. She turned around in his arms. Her face still buried in her shaking palms. She rested her forehead on his warm chest, leaning her body on his to support her shaking legs, as she continued to sob into her hands. You can't ask me things like that so suddenly, she complained in a quiet voice, her voice muffled by her hands. He chuckled at her reaction and tightened his hold on her. He could see the blush quickly taking over her pale skin. Her ears were blazing, it was so adorable. Why not? He asked her, amused at the way she was handling this. Because I'll start crying uncontrollably, she said with a sob, and he continued to be amused with her reaction. She must have expected it someday. Why was she reacting so cutely like she hadn't expected it at all? He wondered with a smile. Will you? He asked again with a hint of hopefulness in his voice. Yes, she said quietly, sniffling and still unable to control her tears. Hinata was surprised at the sigh of relief that escaped his lips as her head rested on his chest. She was finally aware of the rapid beating of his heart thumping under her ear as well. She finally moved her hands from her face and looked up at him. Her face was wet with tears, and she actually had snot drooling down her nose. He knew she would go completely red if she knew, and he wouldn't want to miss that. So he smiled down at her and wiped the tears from her face with one hand while the other still held onto her. Then he ran his thumb over the top of her upper lip softly a couple of times. He could tell it took her a while to understand what he was doing, but when she figured it out, her lavender eyes doubled in size and to his greatest pleasure went completely cherry red all over. There's a tissue box right here, she told him incredulously as she reached behind her, grabbed it from the counter. She pulled out a tissue and fumbled with it for a moment before grabbing his hand and wiping it furiously. Then she wiped her nose with it, her face still as red as a ripped tomato. I know, he told her with a smirk before leaning down to kiss her lips. She frowned at him before kissing him back because right now, she was the happiest person alive, and his nature to see her turn red will not stop her from enjoying the fact that she just got engaged to the love of her life. Naruto was terrified the last time he came to the Hyuga compound. But to say that he felt any differently now would be a huge lie. He hadn't thought that he would have to be here for a while when he first came here to ask Hiashi Hyuga for permission to court Hinata. But thinking back now, it feels like it was just yesterday, and he felt terrified yet again. Though along with that terror, he felt more confident about this visit than he felt in his last visit. Maybe it was because he already had permission to be with her and has a strong feeling he will not be rejected by Hiashi. Nonetheless, he now stood in front of the huge metal gate that led to the compound in hopes of asking for Hinata's hand in marriage. It had taken him a while to come down from the high after Hinata had said yes to his proposal. But he had refrained from telling anyone about it until they received the okay from Hinata's father. Of course he has told the Tem and Sakura-chan. Uzumaki-sama, Hyuga-sama is expecting you, he heard the familiar voice of Katsu breaking Naruto out of his thoughts. Thanks, Naruto replied as he stepped into the compound and flashed a smile at the gatekeeper. Sure, he used to hate the guy, but he doesn't care anymore because Hinata as his Ankatsu can have all the feelings he wants towards her, but her feelings towards Naruto would never change. He knew that. Nothing has changed since the last time he was here. He was led by Katsu through the same hallway to the same room he had met Hiashi in last time. He only hoped that today's outcome would be just as successful. Naruto Uzumaki. Hiashi greeted him as he sat down on the floor in front of the leader of the Hyuga clan. He wasn't as nervous as he was when he first met Hiashi because that had been his first time meeting a clan leader. But since then, he had met with many clan leader and even village leaders. In his Hokage training, Ba-chan has taken him to many important meetings and he had learned the hard way to act in front of important people. Ba-chan's solution to him acting immature had been giving him a good old punch to send him flying through trees. Thanks to that, and for the fear he had for his life, Naruto is well trained in the art of being polite and having manners. Something everyone is surprised about each time he shows a glimpse of that side of him. Good morning Hiashi-sama. How are you? Naruto began putting his training to use. It still felt a little weird to talk so formally to people, but if it meant he got the result he wanted then he will do it, believe it. I am well. Congratulations, I do believe that you would be Hokage soon. Hiashi said though his facial expression gave away nothing. It is true that he would be Hokage soon and the news has spread although out not only the Leaf Village but other hidden villages as well. But he is not to be officially named Hokage for at least another year. Apparently he has a lot to learn, according to Ba-chan. Thank you sir. Naruto replied with a grin. He loved it when people congratulated him on it. It always reminded him that what has always been his dream is finally about to come true. To what do I owe the pleasure Naruto Uzumaki? Hiashi continued in his usual authoritative voice. Naruto straightened his back and looked him straight in the eye, his blue eyes dancing with determination. Hiashi-sama, I have been together with Hinata for over 2 years now. Each day I fall more and more in love with her. I want her to be a permanent part of my life. So I'm asking you. Naruto paused, only to land both his palms on the floor in front of him and bow his head down to the man before him. To give me Hinata's hand in marriage ere. He finished though he did not raise his head to look at Hiashi. He remained like that, his forehead resting on the floor, his breath coming out in slight pants for some unknown reason. He didn't hear from Hiashi for a long time. Just when Naruto began to worry that maybe Hiashi had gotten up and left the room, he heard his quiet voice. Raise your head Naruto. His voice sounded calm, too calm for Naruto's liking. Naruto raised his head and gulped down the lump in his throat before turning his blue gaze to the cold and distant ones of Hiashi. I know the two of you feel very strongly towards each other. I am happy that Hinata has found someone who loves and respects her as much as you do. Hope began to build up in Naruto's chest as Hiashi continued and his heart beat so loudly in his chest. But, Hiashi continued as Naruto's heart sank at that one simple word. His heart began to beat faster if that was even possible and his stomach was doing great leaps and he couldn't help the deep inhale of breath he took as Hiashi continued and Naruto listened because he didn't know what else to do other than run. You two are only 21 years old. You are too young for marriage and the responsibilities that come along with marriage. Hiashi finished in a surprisingly calm and kind voice. Naruto stared at the man as he stared back. What was he supposed to do now? If he couldn't be with Hinata then he would be so sad. So lonely. Naruto's head dropped from Hiashi's to the floor as he felt his heart twist and turn inside of him. I'm not saying you shouldn't get married ever. I'm merely saying you should wait. Hiashi said as Naruto's look of complete loss was too much to bear, even for him. Naruto's head snapped up to Hiashi's, I'll wait. I'll wait for as long as you want me to. Just don't take her away from me. Naruto pleaded to Hiashi's surprise, especially since he had not said that he wanted them to not see each other. Naruto's body was filled with a new kind of happiness as he heard Hiashi say that they could get married and that all he had to do was wait. Maybe the reason he felt so strongly towards Hinata was because she was giving him something he has longed for as long as he can remember. Maybe the reason he felt such a desperation to keep her in his life is because he feared loneliness so much. The loneliness he has felt all his life as he played by himself when he was younger, or the loneliness he felt when he returned home to an empty apartment. Maybe it was unhealthy for him to be so attached to her. Maybe it was wrong for him to depend on her so much. But the thought of not being with her, the thought of never being able to kiss her, to touch her and hear her say those wonderful 3 words he never gets tired of hearing her say, it hurts, it kills. The pain is so excruciating. The pain of his heart twisting inside him, the pain of oncoming tears as they threaten to be released, it's all so agonizingly painful. Naruto was snapped out of his thoughts as he heard a soft laughter coming from the man sitting in front of him. Naruto blinked in surprise at him, not knowing what to think. He had thought that Hiashi Hyuga was a man incapable of things like laughter. Naruto Uzumaki, you are an amusing one, Hiashi said as his laughter continued quietly. Of course you can continue to court Hinata, I was only suggesting that you wait a few more years before marriage, he finally said when his laughter has died down, though an amused smile was still present in his pale lips. Naruto blushed at his haste and impatience as he scratched the back of his head in embarrassment. After his rather weird conversation with Hiashi Hyuga, the man laughed for crying out loud. Naruto bid him goodbye and headed towards the gate. Which is where he found his lovely fiancée waiting for him, pacing back and forth in front of the gate. As soon as she heard his footsteps, she stopped her pacing and turned her beautiful eyes to him. He stopped walking, seeing the hopeful look in her lavender eyes. She ran towards him and stopped in front of him, waiting for him to give her the good news he did not have. What happened, Naruto-kun? She asked hurriedly, looking up at him. He hadn't even had enough time to come up with something good enough to tell her. He raked his brain for an answer as she waited. I think, maybe we should wait. You know, until we are a little older. Naruto said, trying to avoid her eyes as much as possible. What? She asked quietly, unable to comprehend his words. Naruto's heart squeezed at the broken sound of her voice as she attempted to understand why he wanted to wait all of a sudden when he was so eager about it only a couple of days ago. Naruto sighed before turning to look at Hinata and saw the confusion in her eyes. He raised his hand and slowly ran it down a strand on her blue hair. We are only 21, Hinata. I think we should just wait for a couple more years, he told her with a small smile, trying to assure her. Did my father ask us to wait? She asked, her confusion melting away and understanding filled her eyes. He's right though. I mean, we could just wait. He's not telling us to stay away from each other, so that's a good sign, he said lightheartedly with a short laugh that did not reach his eyes like it usually does. He could tell she could see right through it when she raised a perfect blue eyebrow at him. It doesn't matter. Hey, all we have to do is wait. We waited a long time to find each other, we could wait a couple more years, right? He asked as he ran his thumb over her soft cheek. That's exactly why I don't want to wait. We've waited so long, Naruto-kun. I don't want to wait anymore, Hinata said, shaking her head. I'm sorry I couldn't convince your dad, Hinata. I was just afraid that if I fought with him, he would tell me not to see you again. Hinata's eyes softened at his words and she took hold of his hand that was softly caressing her cheek. Fine. A couple more years then. But that's it, she said firmly yet still with a soft smile. He bid his goodbye to Hinata as well, and just to spite Katsu, he pecked her on the cheek before leaving. He may not have a reason to hate the guy, but there's no reason he couldn't have some fun. To be honest, Naruto was upset that he will not be able to marry her within the next year. He wanted to come home to her, he wanted to eat the food that she cooks every day, and most of all, he wanted to start a family with her. Of course it wouldn't happen for a while since he would be busy soon with Hokage duties, but he wanted to be close to her as much as possible, and now it seems that dream will have to wait. But right now, If all he gets to do is be a part of her life, then he is happy with it. Then that's all he wants. It's all right with him. Father, may I come in? Hinata asked as she stood in front of the door to her father's dojo. She felt nervous, very nervous really, but she needed to speak with her father and she would not let anything get in the way of that, not even her own personality. Yes. Come in, she heard her father's voice. She took in 2 deep breaths before opening the door and entering in. She bowed to her father before sitting down in front of him. She had been sad to hear that her father had not given she and Naruto his blessings to get married. She had longed to stay by Naruto's side for as long as she can remember. She had vowed to do so in the heat of battle. The key to her happiness is Naruto. Why couldn't her father understand that? Did he ask you before he asked me? Her father began even before she did. It seems her father already knew why she was here. She was taken aback by the coldness in his voice. Or maybe it was the lack of emotion. It was nothing she wasn't used to, but for some reason it felt odd to her. Why, yes, father. She replied quietly, avoiding her father's eyes. And what was your answer to him? He asked, and her instant thought was to say that she refused. But why does she have to lie? She's 21 years old and the man she loved asked her to marry him. Of course she said yes. I said yes, father. She answered quietly yet again. You should not have said that without asking me, Hinata. You are aware of that. You should have also known that you are too young to get married. And you should have told me right away. Her father continued, and she listened, just as she always does. She has always listened to everyone. She had listened to what everyone had to say. And most of all, she had always listened to her father. Pleasing her father, getting his approval, that's all she wanted, and to do that she has taken every insult he threw at her. Every time called her weak, she thrived to become stronger without holding it against him. Every time she wanted him to just hold her and tell her he loves her, he had instead told her that crying makes her weak. She had never asked for anything from her father. She only worked hard to receive the kind of words he gave to her little sister. But this one thing, this very important thing that she wants more than she had ever wanted anything else, and he can't even give that to her. Naruto is all she's ever wanted. He is the only thing she will ask her father to give her. Father, she said quietly, though she was finally feeling the confidence that she needed. She looked at her father to find him looking at her in surprise. And she knew why. She had interrupted him, something she has never done before. But she was feeling the adrenaline rushing through her, and it gave her the strength to tell her father exactly what she was thinking. I want to be with Naruto-kun. I want to be by his side, and I know he will be by my side as well. You may think we are too young, and you may even think that we don't even know what we are getting into. But I have never been more sure of anything than I feel when I say I want to marry him. I love him, and, as my father, someone who is closest to me, you should see that he makes me very happy. So, please, father, please let us get married. She finished, her gaze never faltering, and she was glad for it because she got to witness the shock in her father's eyes as she, for the first time in her life, told her father what she was thinking and what she wanted. She was finally able to stand up to her father, and as odd as it may sound, she was proud of herself for doing so. You really must love him a lot. Hiyashi said finally after a long silence, feeling oddly proud of his daughter when he should be furious with her. Yes, father, very much, she said, the adrenaline still running through her blood. I suppose I will not be able to convince you to wait longer. Hiyashi said as he let out a sigh. No, father, she said firmly. Hiyashi let out another sigh as he closed his eyes, and when he reopened them, he was met with the determined eyes of his daughter, and he couldn't help but smile. I could tell he loves you a great deal. I know he will not let any harm come to you because he will have to deal with me after. I suppose having him as a son-in-law wouldn't be the worst thing in the world. Hiyashi continued, and Hinata stared at her father in shock. Father, do you give us your blessing? She asked in surprise, unable to believe that she had been successful in changing her father's mind. I hope you have a long and happy life, Hinata. Her father said, and she wouldn't have been able to stop the tears even if she tried. Oh, thank you, father, she said as tears of happiness rolled down her cheeks. Now go and tell him. The boy looked like he's lost the biggest battle of his life when he left. Hiyashi said as Hinata stood up to leave the room. Hinata nodded happily to her father and ran towards Naruto's apartment to give him the good news. Naruto hadn't had much of an appetite as he returned home. So he had only ordered 5 bowls of ramen from the takeout menu they had. It was while he was barely enjoying his 3rd cup that he heard his name being called. He knew right away it was Hinata who was frantically calling out to him. So he hastily put his bowl on the kotatsu table and ran to the door as he wiped his mouth with the back of his hand. He ran out his door and looked down at the road, leaning on the railing to find Hinata there with a huge smile adorning her face. Hinata, is everything alright? He yelled from above since as he lived on the 3rd floor. Hinata was pretty much bouncing on her feet, Naruto noticed. He said yes. She blurted out in a hurry. Naruto stared at her in confusion. Naruto-kun, father said yes. He gave us his blessing. She yelled happily. Her voice reaching decibels he had never heard her voice reach before. But Naruto finally caught up with what she was saying. His blue eyes widened and he stood there in shock, staring down at her before putting his awesome ninja skills to use and jumped down the railing. He heard Hinata gasp, but he landed perfectly on his feet about 10 meters away from her. Are you serious? He asked as he took slow steps towards her. She nodded her head happily, and that's when Naruto began to run. He reached her in no time and Hinata let out another loud gasp as he lifted her up in his arms and twirled around. She wrapped her arms around his neck and his hands remained on her waist, holding her tightly even as he stopped twirling and put her down. As soon as her feet touched the ground, she moved her gaze towards his blue ones. Her hands cupped his face as she looked at him with a beautiful smile. He said yes. He repeated in disbelief. She nodded, assuring him of that fact. Hinata watched as Naruto closed his eyes and shook his head with a smile. What is it? She asked him, and he opened his eyes and looked at her, his eyes filled with so much happiness that his blue eyes shone under midday sun. It's weird, but I feel like crying, he said as his blue eyes filled with tears. She tilted her head and smiled up at him. She moved her hand lower and gently caressed his whiskered cheek just as he had done earlier. Me too, she whispered as she continued to caress his cheek lovingly. When Naruto and Hinata decided to get married, their idea of their wedding was a small ceremony in which they would be surrounded by all the people they loved. The planning done by the bride and groom had a guest list of at most 30 people. Their friends and people Naruto thought of as family, such as Kakashi-sensei and Tsunade and a few others, as well as a few of Hinata's close relatives. But as soon as the members of the Hyuga clan got a whiff of the small ceremony they were planning, it had all gone to hell from there. They had immediately called Hinata and Naruto to the mansion and taken all control over wedding planning. Apparently, according to the clan, the soon-to-be bride and groom were happy to hand over everything wedding related to the Hyuga wedding planners, though neither remembers agreeing such a thing. Either way, Naruto and Hinata were not important in the planning of their own wedding because all the planners wanted the two of them were to see if they fit into their kimonos. Hinata's father was more than happy to pay for all the costs of the very expensive wedding his family wanted to have for wedding of the Hyuga heiress, and Naruto had been overjoyed to hear those words come out of his future father-in-law's mouth. Though Naruto does have a bit of money, he didn't think he'd be able to finish paying off for the extravagant wedding even if he saved all his money and only ate ramen for the rest of his life. The wedding planned by the Hyuga were supposed to be later in the day. Naruto knew that the reason for that is because somewhere in that hectic schedule, there were fireworks. That idea had also overjoyed the boy because that gave him and his fiancée a perfect amount of time to have the wedding that they truly wanted with only the people they loved. Of course, it had been quite difficult to convince Hiyashi to attend the wedding behind the backs of the council members, but he had finally agreed after making Naruto and Hinata promise that they will attend the ceremony at the mansion. It had of course been in super secrecy, only a select few, the invitees, knowing the time and location. When it came to picking the time, they had no choice but to pick the morning, 10 o'clock to be exact, but the place they had full control over. One afternoon when Naruto and Hinata had been sipping tea in his apartment, Hinata had asked where he would like to have their private wedding. After much consideration, he came up with what he thought was the best location to have his wedding. Which is how he found himself pacing back and forth in a classroom inside the academy. When Hinata had asked him where he wanted the wedding to take place, the first thing that came to his mind was the swing at which he spent most of his childhood. He had decided then that that's where he wanted to get married to Hinata. Since it was a Saturday, they hadn't had trouble getting permission from Tsunade, and the idea had been perfect since they could use the classrooms to get ready and wait until the time is right. Naruto had been pacing back and forth sweating buckets for a while before Sasuke had pushed the poor man into a bench in the classroom to sit down and told him to calm down. Then Naruto had stared at the wooden desk and mumbled something that sounded like a prayer of some kind to a ramen king or something from what Sasuke heard. Naruto honestly didn't know why his heart was pounding inside his chest and why he was sweating in his kimono on this fine spring morning when he knew Hinata would not stand him up. He trusted her like he trusted the sun to rise every morning and set every evening. Yet, for some reason his palms were sweaty and he could feel sweat dripping down his back. Dobi, stop sweating like a pig, it's time to go. He heard Sasuke's ever so caring voice coming from the doorway and lifted his head to look at Sasuke in his own black kimono. Naruto nodded at his best friend and swallowed the lump in his throat before standing up and walking towards the exit, which led to a place that held some of his most painful memories. Maybe that's why he was so nervous. The thought of being in that place brings back memories of loneliness, and perhaps some part of him still fears that loneliness despite having all these people that he calls family, despite having Hinata. As the exit neared, Naruto had suddenly forgotten why he had picked this location. His heartbeat only increased in speed as the light from the outside filtered in through the wooden door. Flashbacks of when he was young and still in the academy played in his head as he continued. Flashbacks of running out the same door hoping someone would be there waiting for him outside, waiting to hug him and welcome him. Flashbacks of sitting on that swing as he watched his classmates surrounded by their parents. Flashbacks of people calling him names while he sat there quietly, desperately wishing and hoping someone would hold him while he attempted to keep his tears at bay. As soon as he stepped foot through the light and into the beautiful spring morning, he was greeted by the big beautiful oak tree that shadowed him in his younger days and the infamous swing that he somewhat feared. But then his gaze moved around the space surrounded by the wooden fence and his blue eyes widened. All the people that he held dear, except for a few missing people that he wished more than anything could be here, were all sitting down on the benches they had spent all night moving from the classrooms to outside. There weren't a lot of people, but he recognized all of them as they stared back at him. On the front row sat his soon-to-be father-in-law in a traditional gray kimono with a black haori over it, and beside him sat Hanabi in a lavender kimono with Konohamaru sitting beside her, and Iruka-sensei sat beside the self-proclaimed 8th Hokage in a blue kimono. Then there were the Sand sibling in the second row with Rock Lee and Gai-sensei. There was Shizune with Kakashi-sensei and Shikamaru and Choji, and he assumed Ino, Sakura-chan and Tenten were with Hinata. Kiba, Akamaru and Shino were there taking up a whole bench for just the three of them. Something about having certain rights as the bride's teammates. Naruto couldn't care less as long as they didn't hang around his house too often. His face immediately broke into a soft smile that turned into a grin as he waved at the people who had attended his wedding. "You all came, Datbeo," he said excitedly with his widened smile. Naruto's blue eyes again wandered to the swing hanging from the big oak tree as he stared at it as he made his way towards it. The swing didn't look like the lonely piece of wood it used to be. Ino had done a wonderful job in decorating it. The ropes were lined with pink plumeria flowers running the lengths of the rope, and the seat held a beautiful bouquet of white plumeria. It was hardly believable that this was the same swing he spent so much of his childhood on. As he reached the swing, his hand slowly rose up to hold one of the ropes, being careful not to crush the flowers or he will face the wrath of Ino. The swing moved slowly under his touch and he wistfully watched it with a soft smile on his face. His heart ached as the translucent younger version of himself stared back at him with tear-filled cerulean eyes. He forgot about the guests who were watching him from behind and for a moment even forgot why he was here. It was just him and the version of himself that he feared going back to. His hand twitched to reach out and hold his younger self, tell him everything will be alright and make the pain in his heart that Naruto knew he felt go away. Before he knew it, his hand was already moving towards the younger Naruto in an attempt to console the boy. Naruto-kun. Before his hand reached, he heard the familiar voice he loved so much from somewhere behind him and he immediately turned his head around. Upon seeing his bride, Naruto's whole body stilled. Hinata stood at the doorway he'd stood at only moments before, looking at him with her big cream eyes, a hint of concern lacing them. But what left him completely immobile is not just her eyes or the fact that he had been daydreaming and forgot his wedding. Hinata was dressed in a white kimono with an autumn leaf pattern with a thick yellow obi tied around her midsection. It wasn't nearly as extravagant as the kimono waiting for her at the Hyuga mansion, but she had never looked more beautiful to him. Her beautiful midnight hair was in a half bun at the top of her head while the rest flowed down her back with a few short strands loose around her face, framing her round face beautifully. Her bangs that usually covered her forehead was now combed to the side slightly, and from where he stood, he could see that she had nothing but a layer of light pink lip gloss on her lovely lips, letting her natural beauty shine through. Naruto could have sworn that in that moment, as he admired the beautiful woman who was his fiancée, she and he were the only two people in the clearing, and she shone like the sun the longer he stared at her. He was sure his eyes were as wide as saucers because each day he seems to find Hinata more beautiful than the previous day, and he thinks that it is impossible for her to be any more beautiful, but each day she surprises him. And right now, he had no words to describe how stunning she looks. He knew he would not be doing her beauty justice even if he tried. She was beauty in all sense of the word. Her face broke into the soft smile she gives him when she knows that he's stuck in memory lane, and his own dry lips broke into a smile of his own. His head turned back to the swing to look at the boy, only find him gone and the seat empty. He closed his eyes and let out a quiet laugh and shook his head slightly before turning back to Hinata. He was now aware of the people that surrounded them and also hear the snickering of a few of them at his open admiration of his bride and the dark blush that had resided on his whispered cheeks. From his opinion, he had the right to gape at her as much as he wanted, it was only a problem if other men do it. The ceremony was held in front of the swing with Tsunade pouncing them husband and wife and calling them Naruto and Hinata Uzumaki for the first time, eliciting a squeal from Sakura-chan and Ino as well as a mighty blush from his wife. Naruto's heart swelled with happiness at Tsunade's words as he beamed in happiness. His wife, Hinata Uzumaki. Hinata Uzumaki, the words feel so perfect, like it's meant to be. He heard clapping from the audience as Tsunade finished talking, and the new husband and wife smiled at each other as Naruto reached his hand and offered it to Hinata, which she gladly took by lifting her own hand and putting it on his. Naruto and Hinata stood there staring at each other while they could vaguely see from their peripheral vision that the rest of the guests were clearing out and going inside the academy where Naruto had, for the day, moved Ichiraku Ramen to. Sakura stopped walking at the entrance to the academy and turned around to look at the newly wedded couple. Sasuke-kun, do you think we should tell them to come inside? She asked as she faced him. He was walking behind her and he turned around as well to look at them. He turned back around to face Sakura, and Sasuke slowly intertwined his fingers with hers, surprising her at his sudden affection. No, I think we should just leave them, he said as he pulled a blushing Sakura along with him inside the school. As everyone cleared out of the space, only Naruto and Hinata remained. Naruto motioned for Hinata to sit down on the swing and she followed his instructions and sat down looking at him confusedly. Hinata Uzumaki, Naruto said as if he was trying it out, and Hinata immediately blushed. He tilted his head and made a thoughtful face before smiling down at her. I like it, he said as he held the ropes between his hands. Hinata looked at him with a smile and the blush still in place. Me too, she said softly, her eyes dancing with happiness. After a moment, Hinata looked away from his eyes and Naruto looked down at her in curiosity. I remember, you know, she said, and he looked at her in question. Seeing you here, she finished quietly, and he stared down at her bent head. I remember feeling so sad, seeing you like that. Thinking back now, she started, her voice losing its happiness. I wish I had a little bit more courage to talk to you, she said, looking up at him with tearful eyes. And his heart hurt to see her so sad on the happiest day of their life. I wanted to touch you and hug you and tell you that I'm here. That everything will be alright. That I will be your friend. I really did, Naruto. I was a coward. You needed someone, and, she continued quietly, only for him to crouch down in front of her suddenly, halting her in her words. He faced her and he cupped her now wet cheeks with his hands. Do you remember? He asked softly. Before my fight with Neji in the Chunin exams, I was scared. I was feeling so uncharacteristically down. And then, I ran into you. He said with a smile. You told me I was a proud failure. He said with a soft chuckle. Because of what you said, I was able to be strong. Because you believed I was strong. Do you remember that? He asked again. Hinata nodded slowly. And that time, during the war, when I felt lost and felt like giving up, you were right there beside me. When even I had lost the will to fight, you brought me back. Because of you, the whole world was saved. Otherwise I would have given into Obito. You saved us all. Do you remember that? He finished, and again she nodded her head. You are not a coward, Hinata. You are amazing. You have to forget the times you didn't do anything and think of all the times you did do things. Like giving me the will to fight and making me the happiest person on earth. You have given me so much. He finished with shining, determined blue eyes. Eyes that Hinata was so used to seeing, yet still felt extremely overjoyed every time she saw them. You are with me now. That's all that matters, right? He asked with raised eyebrows, and she looked at him for a while before nodding her head yet again, her smile slowly taking place on her lips again. Naruto leaned forward and captured her soft lips in a kiss. She gasped in surprise but returned the kiss right away. He kissed her softly before pulling away and smiling again because he couldn't help himself. He was feeling the kind of happiness he never believed her would have. The kind of happiness he had wanted since childhood but never seemed within reach to him. I love you, she breathed out against his lips before he pulled away. I love you, he replied before standing up and taking her hand in his and helping her stand up as well. They walked towards the academy hand in hand. By the way, you look gorgeous, he whispered in her ear. Hinata smiled and looked at Naruto. You clean up nice yourself, Naruto-kun. Hinata said, looking him from top to bottom, admiring his black and orange kimono. Naruto put on an uncharacteristically smug look and a mischievous smile, making her laugh at his antics. He could spend the rest of his life listening to her laughter and just being with her. Maybe that's why he picked this specific location. This place filled with nothing but unpleasantness. Maybe he wanted to change that. Maybe the reason he wanted to have his and Hinata's wedding here is because he wanted to create new memories. Better memories, happier memories. Memories that didn't make him cringe and feel fear. But create memories that filled his heart with unbelievable happiness. He knew that he, along with Hinata, will continue to create such memories because as long as he was with her, that's all his life would know. Not the loneliness he was so familiar with, but a happiness he will never grow tired of. When Hinata first arrived at the hotel in which she and Naruto were to have their honeymoon, the first thing she did was take a much-needed shower. Because she knew it would take her hours to come out of her kimono, she had told Naruto to go first. The kimono the clan had picked for her weighed like a ton and she had been dying to take it off. The hot water running down her body felt amazing as she stood under the shower head. Her wedding with Naruto had been everything she had ever wanted. The wedding the Hyuga had arranged was too much for her, and she was more than delighted to have had the small ceremony at the academy. It still felt like a dream, to be married to Naruto and to know that she will be spending the rest of her life beside the man of her dream. As much as she had wanted to spend her life with Naruto, she had only on a few occasions thought about this night. It's stupid, really. She had wanted to spend her life with Naruto for as long as she can remember, and she could imagine she had been ignorant about the wedding night when she was younger, but thinking about it, she should not have been this ignorant as time passed on. Her only objective had been to be beside him and protect him. The wedding night was rarely thought about. But now, the wedding night had arrived and it was making her legs feel like jelly. Hinata. Hinata jumped at the sound of the knock coming from the other side of the door. One of her hands immediately went up to her beating heart and she let out a sigh as Naruto's voice came from the other side. "You okay in there? You've been in there a while," came his muffled voice from the other side of the bathroom door. "Oh, yes, Naruto-kun. I'll be out in a minute," she called out as she turned off the shower and wrapped a white towel around her. Naruto laid back down on the bed after making sure Hinata was still awake in the shower. His back rested on the pillow that was leaning against the headboard, his legs resting on the mattress after standing up all day to greet people he didn't even know, one had splayed over his stomach and the other over his head. He had gone through this whole day looking forward to one moment. It had been so much easier to go through the day knowing that something wonderful is waiting for him at the end of it all. He could hardly believe that he was married, to the girl of his dreams no less. Since the day he had known that he was in love with her, he had been wanting to marry her. He had known that this is the woman he wants to spend the rest of his life with. Every time he thought that Hinata is now his wife, his heart overwhelms with happiness. So much happiness, his heart felt like it's expanding in his chest and he felt like he's going to wake up any moment now because this had all been a dream. The most wonderful dream. Naruto looked up at the sound of the bathroom door opening. He tilted his head to the right and his eyes widened at seeing Hinata. Hinata stood in front of the bathroom door in something he had never seen her in. A nightgown. She wore a beautiful light blue nightgown that went all the way down to her ankles with a ruffled neckline and exposed her creamy skin with a small bow tied at the center of the neckline. Her arms were completely exposed to him, showing him parts of her body that he had had wonderful dreams about. Naruto couldn't help but stare at the beauty of his new wife. Of course he had known how beautiful she is, but each day it seems to grow more and more, and each time he is more stunned than the previous time. Don't look at me like that, Naruto-kun," Hinata said as she looked away from Naruto's wondering gaze, her hands clutched in front of her chest. "Well then, stop looking so beautiful every time I see you," he retorted with a grin, knowing it would definitely make her cheeks go red. In the next moment, before Hinata can even comprehend, Naruto was standing in front of her, standing inches away from her. She unconsciously stepped back, her back hitting the bathroom door. Hinata's white eyes widened as his beautiful cerulean ones looked into them with a slight uncharacteristic smirk on his lips. To not only Naruto's surprise but Hinata's as well, it her who leaned forward and brushed her lips against Naruto's softly. Kissing Naruto was something she had done lots of times in their dating days. She loved it and she was used to it. But today, even this light brush of lips sent shivers down her spine. She could feel his surprise because he did not respond to her kiss for a while. But when he was finally able to, he closed his eyes and pressed his lips harder against her soft ones. One of his hands came up to cup her right cheek, slightly pushing her jaw up to meet him. His other hand went to land on the wooden door behind her, holding both of them up. The kiss didn't go any further than that, though Naruto had great plans for it, before Hinata pulled away, her blush only having been darkened. Naruto loved that about her. They have kissed many times and they have dated for years, yet he still seems to have the same effect on her. She still blushed for him and he loved it every time. Hinata reached her hand and touched his hand that was resting on her cheek. If possible, her cheeks reddened even more as she pulled him towards the bed. He was left speechless at her forwardness. Sure, there were a few times she initiated a kiss, but he never expected her to initiate this. He followed her to the bed and watched as she sat him down. He could see that she was embarrassed from the way the tips of her ears have turned red and the way she keeps avoiding his eyes. His lips tugged into a small amused smile watching her as she held on to his left hand looking at the intertwined fingers. He continued to watch as she closed her creamy eyes and exhaled deeply as if she were getting ready for battle. He would have already kissed her senseless if she wasn't being so adorably amusing about the whole thing. When she opened her eyes again, she looked directly at him and seeing his amused smile made her frown slightly. She couldn't believe he was making fun of her. Maybe she should just go to sleep and leave him hanging. She let go of his hand and slowly rose both her hands to cup his face between them. His eyebrows rose to his forehead, smile still in place. She dipped her head lower and again took the initiative in kissing him. This time with more pressure and more fervor than before. She closed her eyes just as he closed his smile disappearing to the kiss. His hands, resting on either side of him, reached and wrapped his arms around her waist, pulling her closer. He pushed his tongue forward, meeting her lips before she parted her lips to let him in. His heart beat erratically inside his chest as their tongues met and the kiss intensified. His limbs felt numb and his stomach doubled over the anticipation of what is to come. Anticipation of finally making her his and him hers. Anticipation of finally being one with her. Anticipation of finally showing her what she means to him. Their lips danced together, pushing and entangling with one another. After a few minutes, his lips left her swollen ones and slipped down her chin and stopped at her neck as he tenderly kissed her neck. Hinata tilted her head up, giving him more access to her neck. His lips pressed against her pulse point and she unknowingly let out a soft moan at the feeling. Naruto parted his knees, pulling her to stand between them. Her knees hit the mattress, which she was grateful for seeing as she was losing all feeling in them. Hinata's hands went to land on his shoulders and he moved up and down her neck, leaving butterfly kisses, once in a while focusing on one spot and ing on it, leaving a small red mark. His large hands moved from around her waist to her shoulders, landing on the ruffled sleeves of her beautiful gown. She let out a rather loud moan as his lips ed a little harder at her pulse point just before he slid her sleeve down her shoulder. Hinata gasped as the sleeve fell, but before it could fully detach from her body, her hands came up to clutch it from the front. Her now open eyes stared at him in embarrassment and a little nervous. He knew of her insecurities, though it was beyond him why she thought she was not attractive enough, despite having told her constantly that she was in fact the most beautiful person he had ever met alongside his mother. Naruto lifted his head and looked into her cream eyes. The eyes that showed him nothing but love, the eyes that showed him a future without loneliness, a future with her. His hands reached her own hands, clutching her dress at the front, and he gently pried them apart and rested them at her side. The silky dress automatically slid from her body and landed at her ankles. He never broke eye contact with her even as the dress fell and she was fully exposed to him. Hinata couldn't look away from his intense gaze even as the cold hit her body. She tried to find a reason as to why she had not worn a bra before putting on her new nightgown and decided it's too late for that. When his eyes finally moved away from her own and moved down her face, she somehow couldn't look away from him. She watched his face as his eyes moved down her neck and finally landed of her lavish S. Her chest has always been something she had tried her best to hide. If she hated one thing about her body, it would be her S. It got her the wrong kind of attention from men and girls hated her for it. She hated her S because it got any kind of attention at all. It makes it really hard to stay out of the radar since she doesn't like to attract too much attention to herself. But she watched in complete embarrassment as Naruto stared at her chest. All her movement, breathing included, stopped when he slowly lifted up his right hand and ran the back of his fingers on the side of her left. Her breath hitched at the soft contact. Her toes curled on the carpet and watched as Naruto's eyes twinkled with something so foreign to her. He turned his palm towards her and ever so softly ran his rough fingertips over the top of her, barely missing her pink nipple. The way Naruto was looking at her, as if he had never witnessed something as magnificent as her, made her embarrassment fade. No one had ever looked at her the way Naruto always does. Even in this moment, while she was fully exposed to him, he did not look at her the way other men looked at her. Yes, the hunger, the lust was there, but there was something else. Something she couldn't name, maybe longing, maybe something she wasn't aware of. But his gaze filled with this unknown emotion as well as the immense love he felt towards her was completely visible to her in his beautiful eyes. It made her heart thunder inside her chest and made her insecurities fade away. Hinata's body shivered and goosebumps appeared on her body as the sudden cold made her nipples erect, as if things weren't embarrassing enough for her already. Hinata's eyes closed on their own accord as she felt him run his thumb over her left nipple, making it harder than it already was. She moaned at his gentle touch. He was being so careful and gentle with her that she suddenly wondered how he got the nickname Knucklehead. Her legs couldn't hold her up anymore as she felt a weird sensation below her waist. As if he had read her mind, the next thing she knew, she was lying on the soft bed of their suite, her head resting on one of the pillows. She opened her eyes in surprise to see Naruto hovering above her and was immediately aware of how she is and how fully clothed he is. She nervously tugged at the rim of his orange shirt, which he immediately took off, throwing it somewhere around the room. Hinata swallowed the lump in her throat as she ran her eyes over his well-developed muscles. He was beautiful. Her hands ran up and down his chest and he exhaled loudly at the contact, and she couldn't help but voice her thoughts, almost unknowingly. "You are so beautiful, Naruto-kun," she whispered in amazement. He let out a chuckle, his chest rumbling under her small hands. "There's something no one's ever called me," his hoarse voice said with a low chuckle that made him more handsome than he already was. Hinata ran her eyes over his body, her slender fingers running over every inch of his upper body. "Everything about you is beautiful," she started, her eyes moving up to his smiling pools of cerulean, always shining so beautifully. "Your eyes," she said before her eyes moved down to his soft lips that she loved to kiss. Her fingertips ran over his bottom lip. "Your lips," she took a hold of his face in her hands, looking back at his eyes, watching her, studying her like a hawk. "Your personality, your smile, everything is so beautiful, Naruto," she finished, her voice only a whisper. Naruto didn't know what to say to all these wonderful things she was saying about him. Things no one had ever said about him. Things she had thought about him since forever. All he could think to do then was kiss her. His lips coming in contact with hers and his bare chest touching her chest. His hands on either side of her head holding himself up enough to not crush her. "I love you," he whispered against her lips before quickly moving down her neck again. This time though his kisses didn't stop there. He continued to kiss down her neck and over her chest and moved his lips down to her left. He kissed the soft skin, making sure to leave a dark mark just above her nipple. Hinata's soft moans continued, encouraging him more and more. The way Naruto looked at her, the way he kissed her and touched her made her feel precious. Like she was beyond this world and something that must be protected. She loved the way his lips left marks on her. She loved the way he seems to think every inch of her must be touched. However, as soon as his lips circled around her left nipple, she took in a sharp breath. It was so embarrassing, but it felt so good. His tongue running over her nipple as his left hand played with her other. "Naruto-kun," she moaned louder this time. While his left hand massaged her and pinched her, his warm tongue lapped at her nipple. The sensation was otherworldly. Her legs were numb, her fingers were curled around the blanket beneath her, her creamy eyes closed tightly due to the overwhelming sensation of his warm mouth being over her hardened nipple, and above all she was not unaware of the wetness of her lower region. It was almost painful, the feeling of her lower lips. It was something she had never experienced before. Her lower lips felt heavy and they were screaming to be touched, to her own surprise. While Naruto's lips left her left nipple, She could tell from the sudden chill that ran down her spine, and moved to her other, quickly closing over her erect nipple. She suddenly became aware of the bulge poking through his pants. Hinata's eyes widened, having never seen a man like that before. Her eyes moved down to her where Naruto had set up camp. Her left was still wet while her right one was being licked by Naruto. His eyes were closed while his tongue ran over her nipple again and again, but she could see that his expression looked almost painful. Hinata, realizing that he needs to be released soon, reached her hand down between them slowly. She had no idea what she should be doing, but her hands seemed to have a mind of their own as her finger touched him over his pants. Naruto's eyes snapped open at the sudden contact. He had been so focused on tasting Hinata, because she tasted so goddamn good, that he was unaware of her hand moving down below. His eyes snapped to hers as she looked at him shyly, her bottom lip between her teeth looking as if she had done something wrong. He was in disbelief that Hinata had even done that, so they stared at each other like that for a while before she opened the button at the top of his pants and slipped the zipper open. He was amazed at her uncharacteristic forwardness, not that he was complaining, that he was only able to regain his composure the moment her warm hand came in contact with his erection. Naruto groaned as her fingers circled around him. The warmth and the softness of her hand as she slowly ran her hand up and down him was amazing. He groaned again as he pushed his body forward and into her hand more. His breathing became heavy, coming out in almost pants. Hinata watched in amazement as Naruto closed his eyes and gritted his teeth together. She was so intent on watching him that her heart almost stopped beating as his hand circled around her wrist, halting her in her movements. Naruto moved his body upwards, his lips landing beside her ears. "I want to be inside," he whispered hoarsely, his voice low and guttural. Hinata wrapped her hands around his neck in response, her cheeks going red at such words being said to her by her Naruto-kun. "I want you inside," she whispered back to him. He lifted his head up and looked at her with a familiar grin and a raised blonde brow. She bit her lip again in embarrassment, though she refused to look away from him. Naruto shifted on top of her as one of his hands adjusted himself at her entrance. Hinata's hands untangled from his neck and landed on his chest, which is when she became aware of the loudly beating organ beneath. She splayed her hand over his heart and felt the ba-dum of his chest. "Your heart," she started as their gazes returned to each other's. "It's beating so fast," she breathed. Naruto moved his head down to her chest, his ear landing over her heart, listening to the loud and fast beat of her heart. "Yours is too," said he as he lifted his head up to look at her. "Are you nervous?" he asked her, almost afraid of the answer. She looked at him for half a second before smiling her soft smile at him and shaking her head. "No," she replied as her fingers ran through his blonde hair. "Because it's Naruto-kun." She finished playing with the hair behind his ear. Naruto stared at her, already having known that she had put all her trust in him. "Are you?" she asked, seeing his expression of shock. His own fingers moved down to her cheek, caressing it softly with his thumb. "Yes, because it's Hinata and I don't want to hurt her." He finished, shaking his head slightly, his eyes boring into her innocent ones. "It's supposed to hurt a little bit," she assured him as she moved her hips a little, his tip that is already inside her going in further. He took her hint and pushed himself inside her a bit more, finally coming in contact with the barrier of her innocence. Before pushing himself further inside her, he captured her lips in his in a fierce kiss in an attempt to distract her from the pain they both knew was coming. However, the kiss did little to distract her as he pushed all the way inside her and she released his lips from hers and let out a scream, her back arching and her head pushing upwards. When Hinata's back hit the mattress again, the tear that was running down the side of her face was all too visible to him. He tried his best to not move within her warmth as she closed her eyes tightly and tried to adjust to his size. He waited, patiently listening to her soft whimpers, for her to give him the cue to move. When she finally opened her eyes again and smiled at him, he wiped the tears on her face before slowly beginning to move within her. She winced slightly as he pulled himself halfway out. Though he had every intention of slamming himself inside her, he controlled his desire and slowly and gently moved in and out of her until her whimpering turned into moans of pleasure, which drove him into the brink of madness. He picked up his pace as her fingers curled tighter around the blanket under her. Naruto, she moaned his name, making him drive into her faster. Hinata, his own groans came telling him his climax was coming, but he refused to climax before her. He would make sure they both met their end together. That they would both reach the height of their love-making together. His right hand moved from beside her head to uncurl her fingers from the mattress and intertwine their fingers together. He did the same with her other hand, both their hands resting on either side of her head tightly holding onto each other. His blue eyes watched her face as she panted and moaned his name over and over again, her eyes tightly shut, and her face a bright red and her chest pressed against his. He carved this picture of her in his mind, so beautiful. He had no words to describe the beauty that was writhing beneath him, her bottom lip between her teeth. He knew from the way her hands squeezed his finger and the way her tightness squeezed him and from the way she shivered and twitched under him that she was near her end as well. Before he knew it, they both reached their climax, Hinata screaming his name and Naruto repeatedly groaning her name. He collapsed on top of her afterwards, exhausted, his body shining with sweat. He panted heavily as did she, his head resting on her chest. He pulled out of her a few minutes later, landing on his side of the bed on his back staring up at the ceiling. That was amazing. He finally managed to say. His eyes moved towards Hinata as he heard her let out a giggle. His chest rose up and down as he looked at her. Her hair was splayed around her pillow, her bangs stuck to her forehead, her cheeks a beautiful light pink and her beautiful body still visible to him. She was so beautiful he could hardly believe it. He grinned his familiar grin at her before pulling the covers over their bodies, pulling her closer towards him. They remained like that for a while, his hands wrapped around her and her head tucked between his neck and shoulder. He knew she was still awake because she was drawing unknown patterns on his chest. So he moved his hand down between them and cupped her lower region, covering it with his hand. She gasped at his sudden intrusion and looked up at him with reddened cheeks. "Does it still hurt?" he asked her in concern. She smiled at him gently, though her blush remained because his hand also remained. She shook her head in answer. "I love you very much, Naruto-kun," she whispered, instead her right hand caressing his cheek. He smiled smugly as if he'd won some kind of heavenly gift. "I love you too," he said before leaning down to kiss the top of her head. When Naruto woke up the next morning, he knew even before opening his eyes that he was not in his room. The false odor from when he dropped ramen on his bed didn't greet him like it usually does, but instead his sense of smell was invaded by the wonderful and unique smell that Hinata seems to carry with her all the time. He was definitely unfamiliar with the warmth radiating off from somewhere beside him. Just as the sun's rays peeked into the room from a small crack in the curtains and into his closed eyelids, Naruto slowly opened his eyes. Looking around lazily, he was reminded of where it is that he had spent the last night and with whom he spent it. His eyes roamed to the body beside him and all he could do was stare. Hinata, his wife, lay flat on her stomach facing him with one hand bent under her head and the other lying beside them. Her body was covered from the waist down with the blanket, her upper body exposed to his gaze. He turned his body sideways, facing her as he tucked his bent arm under his head to elevate it. His left hand rose up to brush his fingertips against her soft, flawless bare back. She let out a soft sigh as soon as his skin made contact with hers. For as long as he can remember, he had woken up in his empty apartment to meet with silence. He couldn't count the number of times he'd wished for someone to be there to greet him in the morning. When he was younger, he had thought that ever having someone to call his would only remain a distant dream, but after he fell in love with Hinata, he had slowly begun to believe that maybe it wasn't so far-fetched after all. He had dreamt about it countless times. Waking up beside her, but to actually have that happen, to wake to her beautiful face as her even breathing came in and out of her small lips, he felt like he would wake up any moment to be met with the familiar silence and loneliness he was so used. Naruto continued to stare at her peaceful face as he ran the back of his fingers over her back until her eyes fluttered open. She stared at him for a while as if she was trying to figure out where she was. Finally, he knew she figured it out when her face turned a dark shade of pink. Hey, he greeted her with a smile as his hand continued to brush her back. Hey, she whispered back with a warm smile of her own. His heart sped up at the familiar gesture, and for once in his life, he felt like he was home. Naruto Uzumaki, the seventh Hokage of the village hidden in the leaves, opened the door to his room in the Hokage Tower to find his view of the village from his window obstructed by piles and piles of files. He blinked several times at the papers before he quietly closed the door to his room and turned back around to face his advisor Shikamaru. Shikamaru stared back at him in boredom as he buried his hands in his pant pockets awaiting the usual whines from his boss. They stared at each other for a while as if both of them were waiting for the other to speak before Shikamaru decided to speak. You know you have to finish them, he said as if in resignation. Oh come on. I did a pile that big yesterday too. It's Friday. Naruto whined, just as Shikamaru had predicted. Being 27 years old and being the Hokage still hasn't changed Naruto much from the young genin he was decades ago. Sometimes Shikamaru questioned whether that was a good or a bad thing. Yeah, it's Friday, and if you don't finish them today you'll have to come tomorrow to finish them. Which means I'll have to come in tomorrow. So you will finish them today no matter what. Shikamaru finished with a sigh as if resigning himself to the heavy work of having to tie Naruto down to the chair. To his greatest surprise and relief though, he heard Naruto let out a sigh before opening the door to his room again and walking in with Shikamaru following behind him after he recovered from the shock. Naruto sat down on his chair with a plop as he made up his mind to finish all this paperwork before sundown. He doesn't remember the last time he had a break from all this work. His assumption had been that after the war all he'd have to do was sit on his chair and eat ramen. But just because the war was over doesn't mean the world had any less enemies. There were always threats to the world and missions to go on for the ninja of the village. In return he had to do a lot of paperwork to go with those missions, as well as keeping an alliance with many of the countries required a lot of paperwork as well. Boy did he miss the days of verbal contracts. The last time he had dinner with his whole family was ages ago. Usually by the time he got home, Bolt and Himawari were already sleeping. Even Hinata sometimes fell asleep waiting for him. Although he had told her she didn't have to wait up for him, she tried her best so that he doesn't have to eat his meals alone. He's rarely home to see Bolt off to the academy, though he tries his best to wake up in time for it if he's home. Himawari sleep until late and he sees Hinata in the mornings and at night, but those tiny glimpses barely kept him satisfied. Naruto's favorite time is when the three of them come to visit him in the Hokage office. The three of them comes during his break and they eat together the meals they packed. That still didn't give me enough time to spend with his family to his heart's content. Naruto took one last long look at the piles and piles of paperwork in front of him and let out a sigh as he pushed his sleeves back and started on the first pile with determination and a promise to finish so he can go home early. Not to mention it has been quite a while since the last time he and Hinata had some alone time. He's starting to forget what Hinata looked like. If he's starting to forget what Hinata looked like, then it had truly been way too long. Throughout the day Naruto kept on looking at the clock located to his right to make sure he finished in time to go home and have dinner with his family. But even at 7 o'clock in the evening, he still had 2 more piles of paperwork to get through. When he was certain that he wouldn't be making it home for dinner, his determination to finish everything today only increased because that meant he won't have to come in tomorrow, Saturday. As Naruto read and put his signature on the last piece of paper, he let out a heavy sigh as he sat back on his chair. His back cracked as he stretched his arms and legs and looked back at the clock to find that it was past 10 o'clock at night. He closed his eyes and slumped his shoulders as the realization that both Bolt and Himawari already had their dinner and most likely are in bed by now. Usually the two of them were fast asleep by the time he arrived at home. But he never forgot to go to their rooms to wish them good night silently every night before he himself went to bed. He knew his kids missed him. He missed them as well. That's why he tried his best to spend as much time with them as his schedule possibly allowed. But even that sometimes wasn't enough. He also knew that this was leaving an impact on his and Bolt's relationship. Never having had a father himself, he understood only a little of what Bolt goes through having to share his father with everyone else. As Bolt got older, though, he was much more mature about that whole thing. He understood his father's responsibilities and respected it. But Naruto knew that Bolt was still a child and needed his father. Which is why he will be spending all of tomorrow with his family. He had already decided, as he walked home that night, that the only reason he will come into work that day would be due to a serious crisis. Knowing full well that his family will be fast asleep at this hour, Naruto tried to be as quiet as he could be as he unlocked his front door and entered into his house. Locking the door behind him, he took off his shoes and tiptoed down the hallway in the darkness with only the street lights and the front porch light that Hinata usually left on guide him. Upon getting closer to his living room, he was surprised to hear voices coming from there. With a couple more steps forward, he concluded that the voices were coming from his television. He continued to walk down the hall to his living room to find that, indeed, the television was on, though no one seems to be watching it, as the living room was dark and empty, with only the light from the television illuminating the room. It was unlikely that Hinata forgot to turn off the TV before going to sleep. She rarely watched it. He took quiet steps towards the TV to turn it off, but stopped short as he noticed from the corner of his eye that the room was in fact not empty at all. He stared at the three bodies on his sofa. Hinata lay on the couch with her hair cascading down to the floor as Himawari lay nuzzled on top of Hinata, her head comfortably laying on Hinata's chest. Bolt also lay on the couch beside his mother, his body flush against her side as Hinata lay on the side of the couch, making sure that neither of them fell off. As Naruto had suspected, the three were fast asleep. They must have waited up for me, Naruto thought with a smile. He walked closer to the couch and stared at the peaceful looks on the faces of his family. His idea had been to admire the fact that he now has a family, but being ninja they weren't the most heaviest of sleepers, and Hinata being one. The next thing he knew, her lips were curving into a small smile though her eyes remained closed. She always knew when he was around for some reason. He could never figure out how, and whenever he asked her she always says, "I just know," before smiling at him wholeheartedly. "You are later than usual," she whispered as not to wake the children. She opened her eyes slowly after saying that, her cream eyes still a little hazy from just waking up. "Yeah, lots of paperwork. You should have gone to sleep," he whispered back with a tired smile. "They wanted to stay up for you. It's Friday, so I let them," Hinata said, moving her eyes downwards towards their two sleeping children. "Why don't you wash up and I'll heat up some food?" Hinata kindly offered, moving her eyes back to meet his. Naruto opened his mouth to reply but was interrupted by Hinata. "And don't even think about refusing," she said sternly, though her eyes twinkled with playfulness. Naruto closed his mouth instantly. Naruto smiled at her before leaning down to kiss her forehead gently. "Okay. Be back soon," he promised before standing up and walking upstairs to their room. Naruto took a quick shower and wrapped the towel around his waist as he walked out of the bathroom, water still dripping down from his hair and down his neck. He looked at the clock on his bedside table and his pace quickened even more as it already said 10:30 p.m. He put on his usual black jumper pants and a simple white shirt with short sleeves. Hinata probably would have put the kids on their beds already, but he would have to wish them good night after food because he didn't want to make Hinata wait any longer. He took 2 steps at a time as he sprinted downstairs. When he finally stepped into his kitchen, he got the surprise of his life. "Daddy," Himawari greeted happily while still sitting on her high chair. "Dad," Bolt also greeted with a hidden smile. Naruto's blue eyes widened in surprise. They wanted to wait for you to have dinner together. He heard Hinata's soft voice and turned his head to his left to find her standing in front of the stove with a wooden spoon on her hand and a lovely smile on her lips. You guys aren't sleepy? Naruto asked as he turned his warm gaze towards his two children sitting at the table. Nope. 'Cause we took a nap with Mama now, right Oni-chan? Himawari answered happily, shaking her head wildly as if to get the point across. Yeah, I'm hungry. Sit down, Dad. Bolt answered impatiently, patting the seat beside him. Naruto walked over to where Bolt was and bent down and kissed the top of his orange head and ruffled his hair. Bolt whined with a half-hearted protest before Naruto walked to where Himawari is and kissed the top of her head as well, to which she giggled happily. Then Naruto walked to Hinata, but she had already turned around to look at the now boiling pot on the stove. He stood behind her and rested his hands on her hips, successfully surprising her for a moment before she smiled, still not taking her eyes from the pot though. He pecked the side of her head affectionately while she tilted her head closer to his lips, and he heard Himawari's continuous giggle and Bolt's disgusted grunt before he went and sat down beside him, making sure to ruffle his hair again as Bolt continued to protest, hitting his dad's hand away from his head. Okay. I made everyone's favorite. Hinata announced, turning around to face the table of her anxiously awaiting family. Even though they all knew what it was, the three faces stared at her with anticipation and she smiled at them before answering. Ramen, she said, and the three biggest ramen lovers cheered and clapped as if it were the happiest news they ever received. Dinner lasted longer than average, and even after the plates were empty they all sat down on the table with Naruto attempting to catch a glimpse of the lives of his two fast-growing children. Bolt and Himawari animatedly told him several weeks' worth of stories while Naruto listened as if he were listening to the council, giving the two all the attention he hasn't been able to give them. Dinner ended a little past midnight with Naruto putting two very reluctant children to sleep and Hinata cleaning the kitchen. They are sleeping, Naruto announced as he came back to the kitchen. Hinata stood at the kitchen sink with her back to him but turned around to give a smile before turning back to her dishes. Naruto picked up the folded cloth on the counter and started to dry the dishes in the dish rack, the two standing beside each other in a comfortable silence. Hinata finished washing and turned to her side to face Naruto as he continued to dry. She wiped her hands on the apron around her waist and continued to stare at his tired blue eyes. Hinata hadn't missed the dark circles around her husband's beautiful cerulean eyes or the way he tried to suppress several yawns during dinner. She worried about him every day and told him to take a break every chance she got. But she also knew how much he loved his job. The only thing he didn't like, she knew, was not having enough time for his family. Being Naruto, family was a huge part of his life. She knew that having to balance all these things will take its toll on her husband sooner or later, which is exactly why she will be supporting her husband no matter what. Because at the end of the day, she is where he comes to looking for tranquility. Hinata watched as Naruto turned his head towards the clock on the wall behind them. He hummed, turning around to face her. 12:30. I'm not sleepy yet and won't be for a while. Now what could I do during that time, I wonder? He asked with feigned innocence with furrowed eyebrows as if he were thinking really hard. Hinata raised an eyebrow as she tied her hands in front of her chest. I wonder, she replied, looking at his mischievous grin. Maybe, she murmured, moving her face closer to his, and she could feel his anticipation as he bore his blue eyes into her. Maybe, she tried again, this time in a whisper. She saw and heard him swallow in clear excitement for what he believes is to come. You could read a book. She finished in a whisper before pulling back, almost missing the shock pass his eyes. That always works for me, she added innocently in her normal voice. Hinata laughed as his blue eyes sparkled with playfulness and she could guess what was coming next. She slowly inched away from him, backing up, and his expression turned into a mischievous smirk. As soon as Hinata backed into the wall, she stuck her tongue out at him before hitting the light switch beside her head. The moment he was greeted with darkness, He heard his wife's hurried steps running up the stairs and he put his own legs into motion as anticipation bubbled inside him. He heard her laugh just as he entered their room. It was dark in their room and Naruto felt around for the light switch after quietly closing the door behind him. Hinata gasped as light illuminated the room and Naruto saw her cream eyes widen. But she had nowhere to run because she was standing near their bed, with her back to it and with nowhere to run to. She let out a squeak and tried to jump over the bed as Naruto charged at her but didn't manage to in time. Naruto caught her and wrapped his hands around her waist, pulling them both down to the bed. I don't think so, he said as he pulled himself up to face her with his arms wrapped around her and him lying on the bed on his side looking down at her. Her midnight hair sprawled on their mattress and her cream eyes showed clear happiness. Add to that her melodious laugh and Naruto wondered how he ever got so lucky. God, I missed you, he said, his voice low and raspy. Hinata's laugh disappeared, giving way to a loving smile. Naruto didn't waste any more time as he leaned his head down to lock their lips together. He took a deep breath before tilting his more and deepening the kiss that was taking him to cloud 9. Mommy. Naruto immediately got off of Hinata as Himawari's voice reached their ears and his blue eyes turned to the closed door. He sighed in relief when he saw that the door was in fact closed. Yes, honey. Mommy's coming, Hinata said as she stood up from the bed and walked towards the door, patting down her hair in the process. She opened the door to reveal Himawari in her pink onesie rubbing one of her eyes. What's the matter? Hinata asked lovingly as she crouched down to Himawari's height. Naruto heard Himawari sniffle a little and he sat up from the bed and walked towards her. Did you see a bad dream, sweetie? Hinata asked and Himawari nodded with a pout. Do you want to sleep here today? Naruto asked, smiling down at her scared little face. Okay. Himawari replied happily, all traces of fear and tears gone from her face before she jumped onto the big bed and laying down in the middle. Naruto and Hinata stared at each other in confusion before realizing they have been fooled by their 4-year-old daughter. Naruto shook his head with a laugh before walking to the other side of the bed and laying down on it. He watched as Hinata changed into her nightgown, through the little crack in the bathroom door and sighed at his missed opportunity. Just as Hinata walked back into the room, turning off the bathroom light, they heard a knock on their now open door. All three eyes turned to the door to find Bolt standing there in his sky blue pajamas. I heard Hima-chan crying, he said with concerned blue eyes before his eyes landed on the now smiling little girl. Never mind. He mumbled but hesitated before turning back around to go back to his room with a slight frown on his face. Why don't you sleep here too, Bolt? Hinata suggested, smiling knowing what her son is thinking. TCH, I'm not a baby mom, he complained annoyed, making Naruto smile at his behavior. Clearly he wanted to join but was too prideful to admit it. He was definitely his son. Oni-chan can sleep beside me, Himawari said, patting down the empty space beside her. Fine, fine, Bolt said in annoyance, but he was lying on the bed before anyone's eyes could catch it. Naruto turned his eyes to Hinata and they shared an amused smile before Hinata walked to the light switch and turned it off, closing the door as well. Naruto watched as she laid down on the bed beside Bolt. The two of them laid down on their sides facing each other with Bolt and Himawari safely between them. Hinata reached her hand over her head and laid it down on the pillow over Bolt's and Himawari's heads. She smiled at him lovingly, making her eyes sparkle and look beautiful through the moonlight coming from the window behind him. Naruto also reached his hand and landed it over Himawari's head, his and Hinata's hands intertwining together in the middle. Good night, Naruto-kun, Hinata said, landing her free hand around Bolt softly. He grinned cheekily at her, forgetting all about his missed chance to finally make love to her again after a while. There's always tomorrow. He wondered how people ever fell out of love because every time he looks at Hinata he is reminded of why he loves her so much, and each time that love only increases with each smile she gives him. Good night, Haim, he said, running his thumb over whatever part of her hand is accessible to him. Naruto couldn't help but think back to a time when he slept on a single bed all by himself, imagining something very similar to this. It felt like such a long time ago, and while his past brought pain to his heart, he couldn't helping feeling a little sense of fondness towards those memories, because not only did they help him become who he is, but they also helped him appreciate what he has now even more. His past consisted of just him and a lot of pretending as if he was okay with it. But his future is definitely these three people and their continuous smiles.